Welcome to Murder Mondays, where we take a look at some of the most heinous human beings to ever walk among us, giving comprehensive case overviews in a bite-sized, digestible format. In tonight's episode, we take a look at Heriberto Seda, a copycat of San Francisco's Zodiac killer, who terrorized the streets of New York in the early 90s. Was he the mastermind his charts, codes, and letters portrayed, or simply a deranged young man that got lucky? We'll attempt to answer that now on tonight's Murder Mondays. The streets of New York were terrorized by 3 shootings from March to June of 1990. First, 49-year-old Scorpio Mario Orozco was shot while walking home from his restaurant job in Brooklyn. 3 weeks later, just a few blocks away, 39-year-old Gemini Herman Montenegro was shot through his liver while walking home from a night of drinking. Both would survive but be unable to identify their attacker. A bullet recovered from the scene showed no groove, suggesting the bullets were shot through a zip gun. 2 months later, 78-year-old Joe Proce would not be as lucky, being shot in his lower back and dying later as a result of the bullet hitting his kidney. Next to Proce was a note from his killer, taking credit for all 3 shootings and threatening to kill one person for each sign of the Zodiac. Mistakenly believing all 3 of his victims had died, he proclaimed, quote, "The 12 signs will die when the belts of heaven are seen." The next day, a similar letter arrived at the New York Post headquarters, and when given to police, they realized this was not their first contact from the killer, as 3 months earlier they had received a similar letter which was ignored and even posted up on the precinct bulletin board as a joke, believed to be nothing more than insane ramblings. But police now realized this was no joke, and the streets of New York were soon to be terrorized by a man proclaiming himself the Zodiac. In his letter, he left one clue, writing, "Orion is the one that can stop the Zodiac and the 7 sisters." As a full-scale manhunt began in the streets of New York, police consulted astrologist Gregory Matloff for assistance. Matloff informed investigators that the clue is a reference to Orion and the 7 sisters of the Pleiades not being visible on the nights of the shootings, and the killer was proclaiming he would not strike on nights when they were. Since the 3 shootings had been done in 21 and 63-day intervals, Matloff suggested the Zodiac was striking on variations of a 3-week cycle. As the NYPD threw every bit of manpower into stopping the next potential attack, Matloff suggested the likely date for the next occurrence was June 21st, the day of the summer solstice and longest day of the year. Police feared this may be the resurfacing of San Francisco's Zodiac killer, a man who had killed 6 people 25 years earlier in the 60s and was never caught, also writing similar taunting letters to law enforcement. The streets of New York were gripped in fear. "What's your astrological sign?" went from a common pickup line to a reason for women to call police. Hundreds of plainclothes detectives got ready to roam the streets on the day of the summer solstice. But the killer either broke tradition or simply outsmarted police, instead striking next on June 19th, 2 days earlier, when he shot a homeless man named Larry Portham, a cancer, who was sleeping on a Manhattan bench. At this point, 4 astrological signs had been attacked. The killer took offense to newspapers calling him a copycat and wrote a letter stating, quote, "One Zodiac." This would be his first mistake, as police ran forensic testing and discovered a perfect thumbprint on the newest letter. But the police's excitement was soon to be curbed, as there was no match for the thumbprint in the nationwide database of fingerprints. Things got even worse for law enforcement officials when a story was ran in the newspaper announcing they had the Zodiac's fingerprint, and as a result, the Zodiac disappeared for nearly 2 years. But like all serial killers, the man responsible for these heinous crimes could not stop his urge to kill. And in 1994, the police received a letter from the Zodiac announcing his return and claiming responsibility for the death of 39-year-old Leo Patricia Fonte, who was shot twice and stabbed over 100 times in Highland Park. The next 2 victims would be shot in almost the exact same location about 6 weeks apart under a New York underpass, with Virgo Joseph Diacone shot in the head and neck and bleeding out through his carotid artery within seconds, and then Gemini Jim Weber being shot in the buttocks from behind. Like many of the Zodiac's victims, Weber survived and claimed the Zodiac laughed after shooting him and jumped a fence, making his escape through a graveyard. Reports differ on his final confirmed victim, with 49-year-old Diane Weber being listed as a Libra by some sources and as a Taurus by others like Joe Proce before her. Diane was shot in the neck, but survived because the bullet missed her vital arteries and lodged against her spine. The Zodiac would claim he shot a ninth victim in Highland Park, but this shooting has never been confirmed. In the letter where he claimed this ninth victim, he included an illustration of 9 coded towers, one for each victim. New York Post journalist Kieran Crowley brought them to his father-in-law, who was a veteran of World War II specializing in cryptography and signals intelligence. And upon realizing the towers were built of international maritime signal flags, the code was broken, and it read, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am in control. Who mastery? Be ready for more. Yours truly." It had been 6 years since the Zodiac copycat had begun terrorizing the streets of New York. And while he had managed to elude identification, NYPD Captain Joseph Herbert was becoming closer to finding him than he realized. On top of the fingerprint, they now had the Zodiac's DNA from his licking the envelope closed on the letter that he claimed his ninth victim. And while he repeatedly taunted authorities that there were no grooves left on the bullets from his zip gun, he was apparently unaware that there still were barrel markings that could be used to identify the weapon should it be found. But incredibly, it would not be forensics that would bring down the organized and calculated monster, but rather his own foolish mistake when brought in for an unrelated shooting. On June 18, 1996, 26-year-old Heriberto Seda sat in his living room, furious that his sister Gladys Chachi Reyes was in her bedroom alone with her boyfriend. He demanded the boyfriend leave. When Gladys and her boyfriend refused, Seda fired a gunshot through the bedroom door, prompting Gladys to attempt to flee the apartment. As she fled, Seda shot his sister in her buttocks, but she survived and managed to get to a neighbor's apartment and call police. When police arrived, Seda had his sister's boyfriend held hostage in the apartment. By coincidence, Zodiac Task Force member Joseph Herbert was assigned as the hostage negotiator, and after a 3-hour standoff, Seda surrendered, putting all his weapons in a bucket police lowered down from the building's roof. At police headquarters, Seda was asked to provide a written statement of what happened during the incident, and amazingly, the cautious and calculated killer included a symbol next to his signed name identical to the one he had used numerous times in his Zodiac letters to police. Herbert recognized it immediately, and New York's Zodiac killer Copycat was finally apprehended. In the end, the man who had outsmarted police for over half a decade was nothing more than an angry, immature, reclusive young man, obsessed with astrology and death. He caused repeated disruptions in court, having numerous outbursts and shouting at the judge. A jury found him guilty of the crimes, and Heriberto Seda, New York's Zodiac copycat, was sentenced to 232 years in prison. So did he become careless or simply give up, looking for credit for his evil deeds? We may never know, but the streets are safer with one less monster roaming the shadows at night. But there are many, many more, and we'll be sure to cover them next time on next week's Murder Mondays. I'll see you then.